evening, everyone. My name is Nara Bisoka Kalunga, and I'm going to represent the fourth group, that is the negative team, and I'm from Uganda. And our topic is going to be how should African countries handle the issue of genetic patents and the ownership of genetic information. To begin with the introduction, I'm going to talk about what are genetic patents and what does ownership of genetic information mean. When you talk about patents are exclusive legal rights that are given to a specific sequence or gene sequence and its use or biotechnological interventions, allowing the person holding that patent to control its use, research, and commercialization of the patented genetic material. And what do we mean by ownership of genetic information? This refers to the legal and ethical rights associated with controlling access, use, and distribution of one's genetic data. And when you look at African countries, these African countries should approach genetic patents and the ownership of the information with caution. Why? Because there are very many ethical, economical, and practical concerns that are associated with approaching towards the genetic patent. And there is need to explore alternatives to the conventional patent systems to safeguard the resources of the people in African countries. When you talk about genetic patents in Africa, you're just going to know that Africa is a rich continent and it has a very rich biodiversity whereby it has very many sources of genetic information, and these foreign countries or the foreign entities come to these African countries to exploit these resources and and later on don't compensate for them. You get it? This undermines African sovereignty and it limits local development in various ways. For example, it reduces on the chances of these countries being innovative, it reduces its research, and very many others. Opposing the patents is very crucial to protect African scientific heritage. If at all these foreign entities can't, you know, keep a systematic way of obtaining these genetic patents, and when both sides are benefiting, you get it. So it's better we do away with them than actually having them, but when both sides are not actually being compensated for. Um, why am I saying that we should do away with the genetic patents and the ownership of genetic information in Africa? Is one, due to the ethical and equity concerns, and this is because there is a very big risk of exploitation and potential marginalization of these local communities. I'm talking about the African countries, in that when these foreign entities come to Africa, they exploit the resources. There is no compensation for them. There is no equal rates that they get from all the benefits they get from the exploited material, the exploited resources. And the second point will be impact on innovation and research. Very many, very many patents have really reduced the chances of being research developed wise, and the innovation of different kinds of maybe medicines or different kinds of technologies because of the patents. In the next slides, I will show you and I'll talk about the BRAF genes. Those are the breast and ovarian cancer genes. Yeah. And this is really hindering, it restricts the access of genetic information, and that can only lead to actually low development in research and the innovations in the different technologies. When you talk about the other point is going to be legal and regulatory challenges. Many of the African countries actually fall in the low income developed countries. And when you talk about these legal and regulatory challenges, we're talking about things that are going to be followed when you're obtaining a patent, and people who are going to benefit from the patent, and what are those things they are supposed to do to bring about a patent or the acceptance of the patent. And this debate will entail the development of a robust framework to protect the genetic resources, whereby all the African countries will be able to follow the same regulatory body or regulatory framework, whereby this comes in and you see that When you go to another country, there are different frameworks. When you go to another country, there's also different frameworks. So that complexity in the patent laws or the difference in the patent laws in each African country will actually bring confusion and disorganization in the whole patent thing. And the other thing is economic and development issues. When you talk about African countries, when you go deep down and you drive or you dive deep in the resources that are in Africa, there are very many, but sadly enough, it is that African countries are very poor. You get so the issue of installing or the issue of stressing the genetic patterns and the ownership of genetic information is really going to be at a higher cost for them because they have very many issues that they are dealing with. For example, African countries have very many healthcare problems. They have natural calamities. I hear they have drought. They have very many occurrences of HIV. You get, for example, in South Africa. So they would rather convert that money or they would rather invest the money they have, the little they have, into those units to solve the problems of HIV, solve the problems of food shortage, than actually investing into this whole thing of patents because it's really expensive. Whereby at a point when someone gets a patent, you would have invested in a lot. You get it? So for the ethical and equity concerns, I talked about the exploitation of the resources. When you look at that picture, it's showing that plant. That plant was exploited for making medicine by pharmaceutical companies in Southern Africa, and there is limited like compensation to these African countries where they're getting the genetic information. So the exploitation point is there, and I'm stressing the fact that they are not literally compensated for. You get, and this expedition actually, it leads to the issue of bringing endangered species, for example, because most of them, if you do not follow the protocol, if you do not follow the laws, you will end up actually bringing about the endangered species. So they really explore the resources, exploit the resources, and then do not compensate. Access inequity. Patents on genetic technologies can exacerbate healthcare disparities in Africa countries due to high costs and as seen, for example, the HIV crisis in South Africa. And South Africa in Africa is regarded as that country that has the highest occurrences of HIV. So this the when you look at the TRIPS agreement, that TRIPS agreement was signed by every country, so that every country has access to the medicines or the care that the country needs, but at a certain price or at a certain cost. So this agreement that each country had to pay money for a certain drug, which was patented, so that they can, in some way or the other, be able to treat the disease. And for example, the HIV crisis in South Africa was because there were very many occurrences in South Africa, and the medicine, since it was patented, it created a gap of limited access. You get it? But if it was something like they would generally put out the genetic information and how they derive the drug, there would be an easy and effective access to the medicine because all the pharmacies in South Africa would actually be able to produce those drugs themselves rather than having to wait for a certain foreign company or foreign to bring the drugs to them. So it kind of limited the access. You get it? The access to the medicine. I hope I'm being understood. When you talk about impact on innovation and research, it's going to be a stifling innovation. Genetic patents can hinder innovation by restricting access to crucial genetic data, as seen in the US BRCA1 and BRCA2 genetic patents. This study, when you see in this picture, this study was to find out the genes that cause breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And these genes, when you dig down deep in the literature, these genes were found to be on chromosome 17 and chromosome 13. And these breast cancer genes, people who discovered these genes were actually pleading for, well, not actually, they actually went into court to ask for the rights that give them patents. And then when they got these rights, they started to limit the usage of the different diagnostic methods in the different countries to also identify those genes. And they were like, you get, for example, let me say was it in Canada, I think, whereby they ordered them to collect samples, then ship the samples to America, whereby they would do the tests themselves, and this really reduces, okay, it gives a smaller margin to these other countries on how they are going to be innovative and all, introduce new drugs to the cancer or identify something new with the genes, you get it. So it really hinders research if a certain entity holds on to that information, and it's like, for you to give this information, you're supposed to pay, or you're supposed to go under this, so you're supposed to do this. So it actually limits research on, for example, the breast cancer. That is something that is really globally affecting everyone. You get it? Research monopolies. Patent monopolies can influence scientific progress by restricting competition. Of course, if one entity is holding on to that information, the other entity will not know where to adjust or how much they are supposed to go to induce competition in the research area. You get it? And this limits access to genetic technology, such as controlling certain genetic tests. For example, with that BRCA genes, they were told not to. They were told not to use the different diagnostic methods to find out those genes, and it would rather be done by those people who discover the genes themselves. And legal and regulatory challenges. There are very many complex legal frameworks, and these complex frameworks um, when you base in Africa, and these complex frameworks are going to hinder the implementation of the intellectual properties, because there are very many countries in Africa, and each country is going to probably have its own legal framework. You get it? So when you go to another country, it says this. You go to another country, it says this. You go to another country, it says this. Of course, that's going to really bring a very disorganized, system of implementing those intellectual property laws. When you talk about regulatory inconsistencies, yes, actually, I've actually talked about that. And to add more information on these complex legal frameworks, is that because African countries have very limited, resources. I mean, in terms of money, in terms of resources like funding, so they will not find it easy to basically go follow that lineage or follow those protocols they're supposed to follow to, get the legality or to get the patent laws hope have been understood. And then when we talk about economic and development issues, I talked about this whole process of getting a genetic patent law. It's very expensive, where you have to go to court, you have to get consent from all parties. For example, the PRC agents, they were like people were complaining it's their genes, so why would they patent it? So you have to make sure that everything is followed according to how the law says. And African countries are really having a very big issue with financial resources. So they are they will not be fully engaged into the whole thing of genetic patent laws, because they really have a lot to deal with. For example, diseases. So they will instead divert their money to public health initiatives so that they can control the diseases, and also have a better healthcare infrastructure instead of covering patent litigation costs. And the economic disadvantages, for example, the patent restrictions can hinder the growth of the biotech sector in Africa. For example, in Kenya, local firms face challenges accessing new genetic technologies needed for innovation due to restricted patents. It's self-explanatory, but these are companies, or these are entities in Kenya that are really hoping to be innovative, hoping to have a higher degree in research, but then they are hindered. Their whole aim is hindered because the diagnostic methods are hindered. Everything is actually for paying or for getting access after paying something to someone because they initiated or because they introduced some technology. And alternative approaches. Me and my colleague, we managed to come up with something called or not come up, but discuss how we should pick it. They should actually have an open access model that is promote the sharing of genetic data to foster collaboration and access. research without patented restrictions, and to have public-private partnerships that can support innovation while ensuring these technologies are accessible to the different partnerships. If at all a lab wants to work on something, uh, a laboratory collaborates with a government so that they can enable them to get access to those technologies and then further in the research. And then in conclusion, African countries should take a caution to genetic patents. There, as in how are they going to do that? They're going to do that by prioritizing ethical consideration, encouraging innovations throughout alternative means. I mean, if there is a genetic patent, they've actually restricted its access. I mean, find ways of also coming up with your own thing. I mean, let it not be something that's going to put you down, but rather let it be something that's going to push you to also find a way of what you can also deal with that. For example, with the BRC agents, the way the other people were, the way the people use, okay, the way the scientists got that information, you could also get inspired and then you also do something that is relatively similar to theirs, but completely different in a way that you'll be the first person to have done it. I hope I've understood. So that will create alternative means, and thus it will be addressing economic challenges, and this approach will help protect resources and ensure equitable sharing of benefits. And those are my references, and thank you, questions and answers.